Welcome. I'm Norah Mulinda. I am a U.S. markets correspondent for Bloomberg Television. I'm thrilled to be moderating this discussion with such an esteemed group of panelists here, really just to talk about how Canada is investing in the future of its defense modernization here, especially as a country moves toward its armed forces to enhance capabilities. Canadian companies are really playing a major role here in this scenario. And so we're just going to break down what that looks like here for the companies represented here on this stage. Of course, to my far left, we have Calin Rovinescu, Executive Chairman of CAE, Michael Pyle, CEO and Director of Exchange Income Corp, and then right next to me here, Mike Greenley, CEO of MDA Space. So I want to start with you, Calin, and we'll come down the row here closer to me. Talk to us a little bit about what your company does, and then also how you're thinking about, from your perspective, what the most critical infrastructure investments Canada must prioritize in order to stay competitive and secure.
Thank you, Norah, and it's a pleasure to be here. So first of all, CAE is, at this stage, the world's leading simulation and training company, both for civil and defense aviation, aerospace, and in the military case as well, submarine training and mission readiness. So as we are now in Canada, I would characterize it as being at a generational change, a generational shift in mindset from a country that has woefully underspent on defense preparedness to some fairly ambitious targets. The Prime Minister has announced moving up to 2% within the next year, which Canada should argue have been at in the past, to 5% over the next decade. Those are extremely ambitious but important targets. Which will mean that literally tens of billions of dollars need to be spent on improving this. And that involves everything from defense preparedness, space, which Mike will undoubtedly talk about, cyber, training, capabilities with submarines. I mean, it's the whole shooting match. And so this is participating in this. There's a little bit of history as well that one can look at. In 1959, Canadair was able to manufacture the CF-104 under license from Lockheed Martin. So therefore, we actually had manufacturing of some fighter aircraft in Canada. So you have an opportunity here to participate in the manufacturing process, in the training process, in the service delivery process, in the maintenance, repair, and overhaul process. This involves many, many, many different chapters of this. I might pause there, but there are some very specific initiatives that the government has already announced and worked with us before these announcements on defense preparedness.
Thank you. Mike Pye?
Exchange is a diversified company. We specialize in niche aviation. We fly to everywhere you probably don't want to go. But as it relates to what we're talking about today, we're one of the world's leaders in maritime surveillance. And what we mean by that is we manufacture the actual aircraft. So we're taking, whether it's a Dash 8 or a Bombardier jet, and we're putting anywhere from $30 to $200 million worth of sensing equipment on, and then we're flying them on behalf of governments around the world. It actually started here in Canada in the 1980s with the Mulroney government when they were trying to find ways to be more cost effective, and they outsourced the patrolling of Canada's 200-mile fishing limits on the east and west coasts. And over the last 40 years, that's grown to include every department in the government, including the military, looking for everything from Russian submarines to illegal immigration to drug running. And with the changes in the U.S. and President Trump demanding countries stand on their own, it's certainly been good, I think, not just in Canada, but around the world, for countries saying, okay, what do I got to do to look after myself? And that in and of itself has created a sense of uncertainty. Who do I trust? Who do I rely on? And all of a sudden, governments that used to get their information from someone else are now interested in doing it themselves. And so we're involved with the Canadian government to expand the contracts we have now from the east and west coast to surveil the north. If you can believe it, our biggest undefended border is across the North Pole with the Russians, and we've never surveilled that. That's going to change. But it's not just in Canada, it's a worldwide phenomenon. We've moved into 2 European countries in the last 4 years, and discussions are ongoing.
Thank you. Mike over here.
Sure. MDA Space is Canada's space company, Canada's largest space company. We're involved in 3 areas. Earth and space observation. So we build satellites and deliver services to observe the Earth and deliver that service to military customers and intelligence agencies around the world. Space surveillance, where we operate satellites to observe space and keep track of all the satellites and contribute that to the Department of National Defense, and that goes down to the U.S. Department of Defense. We work on robotics and rovers in space, so the Canadarm and robotics technology that we put on space stations and vehicles to service satellites and build and repair things in space, and then rovers for the moon. And then the third is communication satellites, so broadband data communications for communication data networks and direct-to-device, 5G, in the future 6G, cellular networks from space directly to your cell phone. So these are the areas that we work in. Most of these technologies are dual use. So we provide these to the military in addition to the civilian or commercial markets. At this time, as mentioned, as Canada dramatically expands its space defense spending, space is going to be relevant to that, as we care about the North, as was just mentioned, surveillance in the North, communications in the North, in addition to what I call like allied relevant contribution. As we move up to 5% of GDP, thinking about where Canada can play that's relevant to the allies and contribute something that, contribute areas that we're uniquely good at. Canada was the 3rd country into space that operate satellites after the United States and USSR. Canada was next. So we've been doing that for over 55 years. That's the age of our company. And so our ability to contribute meaningful space surveillance and space communication networks and space counter defense, which will be a spacecraft that you can use to protect other satellites and or go and take a poke at somebody else's satellite. As space gets more congested, it's definitely a military environment. And so that'll be another area where Canada can legitimately contribute in the future.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you all are coming from such distinct perspectives. We really have a diversified panel here when we're talking about all the contributions here to Canadian defense. I want to dig back into the challenges, which I feel as though each of you kind of flicked at a little bit earlier. I want to start here in the center with you, Mike, if you will. Talk to me a bit more about what you think some of the barriers are, in particular, slowing down Canadian defense modernization, and how, as industry leaders, you all can help the government to address these concerns.
Canada has struggled with procurement for decades. The processes we go through are ungodly slow. They're so based in fairness and so based in wanting to make sure they make the right piece of equipment. By the time they choose the technology they want, figure out how they want to purchase it, put it out to the market and make a decision, a lot of times the market's already changed and we're bidding on the wrong things. And so I really believe there's a will in the new Canadian government to do things differently. And if they want to get to 2% in a year, 3% in 5, and 5% in 10, they simply can't. Even if they knew everything they were going to buy, they wouldn't get there. And so part of what the process needs to change is business has to take them solutions before the government asks for them. And so when I use the northern surveillance as an example, the government didn't come out and say, hey, we want to do this, but we said, look, you're doing it on the east and west coast. For the first time in Canadian history, I think all 3 Canadian political parties in the last election acknowledged we need to build a military presence in the north. Well, the easiest way to cover yourself till you get there is to surveil that vast land. And people, I think, don't understand how big Canada's north is. In our medevac business, we fly from Winnipeg up to some of the far north locations, and that distance to go pick up that person for an air ambulance is as far as flying from Winnipeg to the Panama Canal. And so if we don't have sensors, we don't have people looking, we don't have technology, we don't know what's going on up there. And I think the one other piece that I think is a little bit misunderstood is how the different technologies play together. Satellites play a massive role in watching what things do. Drones play a role, particularly in areas of conflict. Aircraft play a role where you need people to be able to make decisions. And so Canada needs a comprehensive group of these kinds of technologies to make it work. And so I think as a companies, we need to go to the government and say, hey, look, we can do this for you, and maybe not sell them a product, but sell them a service. We'll look after getting them stand up. We'll build the hangars. We'll get the aircraft. We'll sell you the information you want. And I think that will enable the government to move more quickly, more efficiently, and actually make decisions, because I believe there's a will to move quickly.
And I'm going to get back to you, Calin, for sure. I know you have some thoughts on this topic, but I want to know about the aerospace sector. How are you thinking about challenges? I know you touted a lot of things that Canada has been first for in space. How are you thinking about this right now?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is time, as mentioned. The biggest solutions are going to be, and the challenges within that are going to be people and processes. So we have to worry about people and then streamline our processes. Space is a unique opportunity because one of the biggest challenges on the personnel side is to have increased numbers of personnel to buy more systems, increased numbers of personnel to operate more systems, and increased numbers of personnel to maintain more systems. Space is an area whereby we can procure more quickly, and we can do it through commercial partnerships and commercial arrangements. The U.S. Department of Defense has a philosophy whereby they don't build what they can buy. If you can buy it as a service from industry that has an established capability, do it. Don't go and rebuild it just for the military. And so commercial partnerships are going to be really important. And then, of course, in space, you don't need people to operate or maintain it. You can put up a capability and really, really go. And so that's going to be extremely important as we go forward into the future.
Back to you, Calin, on that.
Thank you, Norah. So first of all, I wholeheartedly support what has been said thus far on the procurement challenges that Canada has had, and that there is optimism in terms of the early behavior of the Carney government. I'd call two things out. One that occurred last week, the creation of this Defense Investment Agency is a big step. It's a bit of a recognition that, they actually changed the name from Defense Procurement to Defense Investment on purpose. The idea is that this needs to be seen as an investable industry. And for many investors in the room, this is a really good signal, in my opinion. They appointed someone who is a business person. He was vice chair, may still be vice chair at RBC, to take on that role, which I think is a great move. That is intended to, at least on the large projects, to facilitate speed, efficiency, being able to come to decisions. That's an important first step. Secondly, and it was touched on in both the comments that Mike and Mike respectively have made, partnership with industry. I think that we need to get out of the mindset of a supplier and a purchaser and a seller. And I think that has historically been where Canada has been. I think that has to change. So if you have an understanding that the defense industry, the Canadian defense participants can be partners to government in that sense and take it out of the pure, supplier customer kind of a dynamic, I think a lot of progress will be made. Viewing it as being people who actually have a vested interest, of course, in their own companies, but who actually know something about this area. And that might help break the back of this procurement logjam. And then, finally, I'd say that when I look at the United States as a model who obviously has taken defense seriously for the last number of decades, they actually actively promote and support their defense industries internationally. And for the Canadian defense industry and Canadian defense companies to continue to progress, that has to also be part of it. So in the case of CAE, we operate in 40 countries, 145 different sites. That includes civil and defense, but 40 countries, that's a lot of countries. And if you want to build up when the United States wants to get serious about Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or Boeing, they know how to do that. And I think Canada is an opportunity for all of the Canadian defense companies. But it involves this much greater level of collaboration, understanding that if we are serious about defense, we need to do a whole lot of things differently, including partnering with industry at a level that has not been seen before. And early indications, I think, are positive.
So, Mike Pyle, I want to dig a little bit deeper into surveillance. I mean, that's a lot of what you guys focus on here. How do you think about how opportunities Canada has to kind of position itself as a key player here in terms of NATO's efforts, in particular in terms of modernization?
One of the interesting things with NATO is, from the outside, I always thought it was kind of this monolithic group that everyone partnered and we shared information, and it's really not the truth. Europe, all of us are part of NATO. Canada's partnered with them. They don't share information, and so what's changing now is they're building platforms for how the surveillance equipment can talk to one another, what information they share, what they're searching for. Because one of the interesting things about surveillance, it's not just a pure military thing. If you look at Europe now, one of the great things that going on with the tariffs and blockades against Russia is they're sneaking ships in and out. They're false flagging ships. They're running them through people's waters. The surveillance that's going now is actual countries talking to one another and saying, hey, this ship we think is such and such. If it crosses into your waters, be ready. And so when we talk about surveillance, it's massive different amounts of technology, everything from infrared to radar to ultrasound to cameras that can take a picture from 40 miles away with enough acuity to recognize your face. And so when they're tracking these things and trying to establish the rule of law in any number of different areas, communication between the governments and between the equipment itself is important. You talked a little bit about people. It's one of the great challenges the government has, is we've bought F-35 fighters. We don't have a place to put them or pilots to fly them yet. Well, if we're going to add surveillance, that's a whole level of pilots, it's maintenance people, it's engineers, it's facilities to put them in. And so in this environment, to move quickly, as you mentioned, we got to partner with industry who has the capabilities today that can ramp it faster, that can move more quickly and provide the government what it wants. And in surveillance, what the government wants is information. They don't want to fly airplanes. They want to know what's up there. And so it's taking advantage of what technology is there, and more important, or as importantly, getting them that information as quickly as possible. And that's where, like I say, I hope what we're seeing in the first part of the Carney government continues, which is a commitment to doing things differently.
Mike, how do you see Canada's defense industry evolving, and particularly in response to global geopolitical realignment toward things like space?
In phases, I think. I think that we talked a bunch about industry capability that's ready now. I think that as we ramp up our spend in defense, that we have to look at the industries that are ready now, partner with those industry, and be able to move out. But then there's opportunities for investment in what's next. MDA Space is the result of 3 strategic historical government decisions. One was to be able to have communication satellites to talk to all the reaches of Canada. The second was to put robotics on the space shuttle and the space station. And the third was to use synthetic aperture radar to survey all of our coastlines in the country. All 3 of those strategic decisions have resulted in us being world leaders in each of those 3 things. And so Canada's opportunity as we spend more money is to pick what's next in terms of identifying what areas of technology or military capability do we want to be good at next. So phase 1 is to leverage what's there and ramp up the capability quickly in partnership with industry while we're investing in what's next, and then ensuring that what we invest in actually becomes operational capability in what's next.
Mm-hmm. Well, sticking with you, since we're talking about the future here as we're wrapping here, if you were to look 10 years ahead, what does a modernized Canadian defense infrastructure look like to you?
Certainly a larger defense industrial base ecosystem, using the word that we used a whole lot, partnering with the Canadian military to be able to do those things. I think that in air, in maritime, and land, certainly in air and maritime and space the most, there will be opportunities for a larger expanded industry, leveraging what was mentioned about working with Canada to be able to export around the world. 10 years from now, if we're spending $150 billion a year on defense, which is what the numbers would come out to, you've got a much stronger industrial base partnering with Canada and exporting to other countries around the world as well.
Thank you. Calin?
You know, I think you have to start with the premise that the future of warfare will look completely different than the existing or the prior warfare, meaning that, you know, if we want to be ready as a country, we need to move much more quickly, because by the time something will be delivered, whether it's equipment, aircraft, submarines, and training required for that, et cetera, that could be obsolete in the way wars will be fought. And that goes to being ready for unmanned vehicles. We saw in an environment, of course, in the Ukraine, where the use of highly sophisticated drones were able to do colossal damage to significant military equipment that otherwise not expected to have been the case. So unmanned vehicles, and then the training for unmanned vehicles. It's not as if you can show up with unmanned vehicles. So you have to understand what they are. You have to understand the technology that goes behind it. You have to understand what impact does artificial intelligence have with that technology. Does it, cut down radar systems and therefore affect surveillance? Well, then you're going to have a response on surveillance. These sorts of things have to be anticipated, and you have to kind of invest in them now. And so I think each of the three companies here, and undoubtedly many other Canadian defense companies, would be wise to continue investing in defense tech as being part of what is necessary to continue equipping for the future generations of conflict, because they're not going to look anywhere near like the prior conflict. And we haven't actually talked too much about cyber, but of course, that is a key component that you need to defend against. And so the interaction, and this is one of the things that CAE does, is the so-called mission readiness and the implications between land, sea, air, and cyber as defense mechanisms. And that integrated approach to mission readiness will be, I think, a big part of the future.
Thank you. Mike, Pyle?
I don't have a lot to add to that. I think as we go forward, knowledge becomes bigger and bigger in the fights we fight. If you go backwards, it was brute strength. It was how many soldiers, it was how many planes, how many things you have. And now it's really about discrete, small things you can do. It's amazing what in the Ukraine-Russia war, what we've seen, small, relatively inexpensive drones, the damage they can create because the systems weren't designed to prevent against them. And I think you're going to see more changes like that. As our world is more and more based on digital and electronic knowledge, I think people are going to be attacking the sources, the abilities, and those things. And so we're going to need to be ahead of those processes, and we're going to be able to watch to see what our enemies are doing. And I don't think we can lose in what's going on in the world, that there are allies and there are people who are our foes. And we need to team up with our allies, but make sure we're talking the same language and make sure we protect one another.
Well, thank you all so much. With that, we'll leave it there. Once again, thank you all, Mike, Calin, for such a wonderful, insightful discussion. And thank you all so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.